There's a kind of quiet that settles on a ranch after you bury your husband, and it isn't peaceful. People think grief is loud. It isn't. Grief is the sound of one coffee cup instead of two. It's the gate you no longer have to hold open for anybody. For 3 winters I lived inside that quiet, and I filled it the only way I knew how. I baked. I baked because my hands didn't know how to be idle, and because a pie was a thing you could give away. That's all it was. The day I first carried one across the fence line to the cowboy who'd moved into the old Harlan place. A wild plum pie, still warm, cooling the sweat on my palms. I thought I was being neighborly. I thought I was giving him something. I had no idea that pie would crack open a secret my own husband had carried to his grave. A secret about the man next door, about an old Apache who wasn't supposed to be there, and about a debt paid in the dark 20 years before I ever knew Amos Whitcomb's name. Stay with me, because what I found in that dim little house changed everything I thought I knew about the man I'd loved, the neighbor I'd feared, and the price of a kindness that never asked to be repaid. This is the story of the widow, the pie, and the cowboy next door. The dog started it. I want that on the record, because for a long time afterward I told myself I'd gone over there out of Christian neighborliness, and that wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth is that his dog wouldn't stop howling, and I couldn't sleep. And a woman who can't sleep will invent reasons to go poke at another person's business. 3 nights running, that howl. Not the round, full-throated bay of a hound working a scent. This was thinner, a worried sound. It came across the dark between our 2 places, the Harlan place and mine, riding the same cold air that carried the smell of his wood smoke, and it wound itself into my chest until I was lying flat on my back at 2 in the morning with my eyes open, listening to a dog grieve about something. I kept a ledger by my bed. Still do. Started it after Amos passed because the ranch books wouldn't add themselves and my mind had gone to a place where numbers were the only things that stayed put. But the ledger got away from me over those 3 winters. It stopped being just cattle and feed and the price of nails. I started writing down other things, debts of a different kind. Mrs. Pryor sat with me the day of the funeral, owe her. Took eggs to the Kesslers when their hens froze, they owe me, though I'll never collect. Small sums in a private economy nobody else could see. My daughter, when she still wrote, said it was morbid. I told her it kept me honest. What I didn't tell her was that it kept me company. On the 3rd night of the howling I got up, lit the lamp and wrote, "The Harlan Place man's dog cries in the night. Something is wrong over there." And underneath, because I am the kind of woman who cannot leave a wrong thing alone, take him a pie. You have to understand what he was, this man, or what I thought he was. He'd come to the valley the previous spring, bought the Harlan place off the bank for less than the fences were worth, and moved in with 2 horses, a mule, that yellow dog, and no wife, no visitors, no church. He came to town for flour and coffee and lamp oil and left before anybody could get a word past good morning. Tall, lean, dark, the kind of dark that got the men at the feed store speculating. Mexican, maybe. Half-breed, more like. Said with that little curl of the lip men use when they want to sort you and be done. He wore his hat low and his collar high, and he did not explain himself to anyone, which in a small valley is very nearly a crime. His name was Silas Wren. That was all I had of him. Silas Wren, who did not wave when he passed on the road, who fixed his own fences at dawn so as not to be seen doing it, who once, I saw this myself, turned his horse a full 1/4 mile out of the way rather than pass close by a wagon of the Doyle women. A man who arranges his whole day around not being looked at is a man with something he doesn't want looked at. I knew that much. I'd been that woman for 3 winters. So on the 4th morning, I made a wild plum pie. The plums came from the tree by the pump, a straggling, half-wild thing Amos had planted our first summer on the place, 40 years back, from a pit he'd carried in his vest pocket all the way from somewhere he never named. It fruited poorly most years, hard little sour plums the color of a bruise. But you cook them down with enough sugar and a squeeze of the wild honey I kept, and they turned to something dark and secret and good. Amos's favorite. He used to eat it warm with his thumb, straight out of the pan, and burn his mouth every single time, and every single time act surprised. 40 years of the same man burning his mouth on the same pie. That's a marriage. Nobody tells you that's what a marriage mostly is. I hadn't made the plum pie since he died. Couldn't. But that morning I did, and I told myself it was for the neighbor, and I carried it across the frostbit grass with a dish towel over the top, and my heart going faster than a pie should account for. The Harlan place had gone gray and sunken under Harlan's widow before the bank took it, and Sela's Wren hadn't done much to argue with the decay. The barn leaned. The yard was bare-swept, which surprised me. A bare-swept yard is a tended thing, and I'd have laid money the man let it all go to ruin. There were signs of care where I hadn't expected them. A neat woodpile, a line of chilies drying under the porch eave, red as coals, and a small garden, fenced against the deer with a diligence that spoke of somebody who intended to eat what grew there. The dog met me at the gate. Yellow, ribby, one ear torn. It didn't bark. It looked at me and then looked back at the house and then at me again, and I swear to you it was asking me for something. I've kept animals my whole life, and I know when one is trying to hand you a problem. "All right," I told it. "All right, I hear you." I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, and this time I heard a voice inside. Low, not Sela's Wren's voice. I'd heard his once or twice at the feed store, and it was flat and short. This was different, older. It rose and fell in a way that wasn't English, a run of soft sounds strung together like the dog's howl had strung the night together, and then it stopped, and there was a cough, wet and deep and long, the kind of cough that comes up from a place in a man you don't want to think about. The door opened maybe 8 inches. Sela's Wren filled the gap with his shoulder, and he looked at me the way you'd look at a rattlesnake you'd nearly stepped on. His hat was off. That was the first time I'd seen him without it, and the light did something to his face I hadn't expected, showed me a young man, younger than the whole valley had decided he was, 30 maybe, with a hard mouth and eyes so tired they'd gone flat as creek stones. There was a smell coming past him out of the dim room. Wood smoke and coffee, yes, but under it sickness. That sweetish, close, unmistakable smell of a body that isn't well. I'd nursed Amos through his last 4 months. I knew that smell the way you know a voice on the far side of a wall. "Ma'am," he didn't open the door further. He didn't ask what I wanted. "I'm Della Whitcomb," I said, "from over the fence." I held up the pie like a fool holds up his hands to a lawman. "Your dog's been carrying on nights." I thought I don't know what I thought. "I made you a pie." Something moved behind his eyes. Suspicion, and under it, so quick I almost missed it, something that looked like the plain animal exhaustion of a man who has not had one single person offer him one single easy thing in a very long time. "We don't need anything," he said. "We." He heard himself say at the same instant I did. I watched it hit him. His jaw tightened. He'd given something away, and he knew it, and there is no fear in the world quite like the fear of a man who has just let a secret slip its rope. Behind him, the voice came again, a question, I thought, in that soft tongue, and then in English, cracked and amused and old as the hills. "Sela's. Who is it stands so long in a doorway and does not come in? You raise these ranch people to have no manners at all." Sela's Wren shut his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, he had the face of a man surrendering a fort he'd been holding too long alone. He stepped back and let the door swing. The room was small and dim and clean, and there was an old man in the bed against the far wall. I have thought about that first sight of him more times than I can count, and I have never been able to make the words do it. He was Apache. I knew that at once, the way you know weather. He was very old and very sick, propped up on a bolster in what looked like a folded saddle blanket, and the sickness had eaten him down to the frame. But the frame was a proud one, and no amount of dying had gotten the pride out of it. His hair was white and long and clean, brushed back from a face that was all ridges and hollows, the skin gone thin as the pages of a Bible. His eyes were the blackest, brightest, most alive thing in that whole gray room. They fixed on me, and on the pie, and one corner of his cracked mouth went up. "Ah," he said, "now the doorway makes sense." "This is my—" Silas started and stopped, hunting for the safe word. "His grandfather," the old man said, deciding it for him, watching my face to see what I'd do with that. "More or less. The less is a long story and I am too tired to tell it well. You may call me Nanton. It is not my name. It is what he calls me when he wishes me to feel important." A glance at Silas, dry as August. "Which is only when he wants me to eat." I understood then, all at once, everything and nothing. The howling dog, the bare-swept yard, the quarter-mile detour around the Doyle women, the Chili's, the garden, the we. Silas Wren wasn't hiding some crime in this house. He was hiding a dying old Apache man in a territory where a dying old Apache man off the reservation was, to a certain kind of official mind, not a man at all but a problem to be collected and carried back behind the agency fence to finish dying among strangers. He was hiding his grandfather so the old man could die free. I set the pie down on the table. My hands weren't quite steady. "Mrs. Whitcomb," I said to give myself something to hold on to. "Della, I lost my husband 3 years back. I know that smell." I nodded at the bed, and then wished I hadn't put it so bluntly, but the old man laughed, a real laugh, that turned into the wet cough, and Silas was across the room and lifting him before the cough had finished. One big hand behind the thin shoulders, the tenderness in it so total and so unhidden that I had to look away. When it passed, Nanton lay back, wrung out, but his eyes came back to me sharp as ever. "You know the smell," he said. "Good, then you will not lie to me the way he does." A tilt of the white head at Silas. "He tells me every day I am getting stronger. I have never in my life met a worse liar. You," he said to me, "will tell me the truth. It is a thing I have gone short of lately." "Nanton," Silas said, low warning. "Bring the woman a chair, Silas. And cut the pie. If I am to die in a white woman's valley, I would at least like to know what her cooking is worth." He looked at me sidelong, and I understood I was being tested, and I understood also that I had just been let, on some strange, sudden current, all the way inside. I sat. Silas, moving like a man in a dream he didn't trust, cut the pie. He gave the first piece to the old man on a tin plate, and he watched Nanton the way a mother watches a sick child take broth. The old man's hands shook lifting the fork. He got a little of the dark plum to his mouth, chewed slow, swallowed. And something happened in his face. He went still. His eyes, those black bright eyes, went far away, all the way out of that room, out of that valley, back down some road I couldn't see. When they came back they were wet, and he looked at me with an expression I could not read at all, and he said, very quietly, "Where did you get these plums?" "There's a tree," I said, "by my pump. My husband planted it 40 years ago, from a pit he carried I never did know from where. It hardly ever fruits." The old man set the fork down. His hand had stopped shaking. He was looking at me now like I was the thing that had come through the door out of a story, and not the other way around. "Amos," he said, "your husband, his name was Amos." The room went so quiet I could hear the dog breathing on the porch. "Yes," I whispered, "Amos Whitcomb. How did you?" "Silas," the old man said, and his voice had changed, gone thick and strange. "Silas, sit down. Both of you sit down." He pressed the back of one wasted hand against his mouth, and above it his eyes shone, and he looked for a moment like a very old man who has been waiting his whole life for a door to open, and has just heard, at last, the latch begin to lift. "The tree by the pump," he said. "I gave your husband that pit. I gave it to him with my own hand in the dark on the worst night of my life 40 years ago, and I have wondered every day since whether it ever grew. I don't remember standing, but I was standing. I had one hand on the back of the chair." "That isn't possible," I said. And even as I said it I knew it was. I knew it the way you know the last piece of a thing you've been turning over for years. because Amos had never once told me where that pit came from. And Amos told me everything, told me the same stories till I could recite them. And there had always been this one small silence, this one tree he'd tend and prune and never explain. And I had thought it was just a thing men keep, a private grief or a private joke, and I had let it be. "Sit down, Mrs. Whitcomb." The old man's voice was gentle now. All the dryness had gone out of it. "You have carried that tree's fruit across a field to a stranger's house, and you did not know you were carrying it to me. There is no such thing as an accident. My people used to believe that. I stopped believing it about the time I stopped believing most things. Sit down. I find I believe it again." Silas was staring at the old man, then at me, and I saw in his face that this was news to him too. That whatever bound the old man to my dead husband, Silas hadn't known it, and it was rearranging his whole understanding of the woman standing in his kitchen. His guardedness had cracked clean down the middle. For the first time he looked at me not like a threat, but like a person who might, impossibly, turn out to be part of his own story. "40 years ago," Nanton said, and he settled back against the folded blanket, and his eyes went to the low ceiling, and his voice fell into the shape of a thing that had been told over and over inside one skull with no one to tell it to. 40 years ago there was a winter when the government decided my band was in the wrong place. We had done nothing. We were not raiding. We were an old chief and some women and some children and a few young men who had not yet learned to hate. But we were in the wrong place, and so the soldiers came to move us, and moving is a thing that kills more of us than fighting ever did. He coughed. Silas half rose. The old man waved him down with one thin hand. I was not old then. I had a daughter small. His eyes flicked to Silas, and I understood, and my throat closed. In the moving in the cold we were scattered. I was hunted. There was a price. A man on foot in winter with a child hunted. You understand there is no good end to that sentence. He looked at me. "Your husband found us in a dry wash on his own land in the dark. A white rancher, new to the country. Everything he had ever heard about my people told him to shoot or to ride to the fort and bring the soldiers and collect the money. Everything. I had my knife. I had decided already what I would do. And do you know what your husband did?" I couldn't speak. I shook my head. "He put down his rifle," the old man said. "In the snow. He put it down where I could see him do it, and he held out his hands to show them empty, and he said, 'I have carried these words 40 years, Mrs. Whitcomb. They are the most valuable thing I own,' he said. 'You look froze half to death. I got a fire.'" The old man's mouth trembled. "I got a fire," as if I were a neighbor. As if there were no soldiers and no bounty and no winter and no history between his people and mine at all. As if I were only a cold man he had happened upon, who might like to warm himself. He took us in, hid us 3 days in his barn while the patrol quartered the valley, fed us out of his own smokehouse, and never once let his wife see. His first wife, I managed. Sarah, she died before I ever. He never let her see, to keep her innocent of it, in case the soldiers came asking. He took the danger onto himself alone. And on the 3rd night, when the patrol had gone on north and it was safe to move us toward the mountains, he stood in his barn door in the cold, and he did not know what to say to me, and I did not know what to say to him. And so I gave him the only thing I had of value in the whole world. Nanton's hand closed slowly on the blanket. A plum pit. From my mother's country, far to the south. My mother had carried it, and I had carried it, and it was supposed to grow in the place we finally stopped. I did not think I would ever stop anywhere but a grave, so I put it in his hand and I told him, "Plant it where the water is, and live long enough to eat from it, and think sometimes of the man you did not sell." The dog whined on the porch. "And he did," I said. My face was wet and I didn't remember starting to cry. "He planted it by the pump. It hardly ever fruits, but this year it fruited, and I made the pie, and I couldn't make it after he died. 3 whole years I couldn't, and this morning I had to stop." "This morning you finally could," the old man said softly, "and you carried it across a field, to me. He closed his eyes. A tear ran back into the white hair at his temple. He kept the tree alive 40 years so that on the last week of my life it could feed me one more time from my mother's country. He does not even know he did it. He is under the ground, and he does not even know. Silas Wren stood in the middle of that small room with his big hands hanging empty at his sides, and he was weeping without a sound, the way a man weeps who taught himself young that weeping got you nothing. And I understood that whatever I had thought I was walking into with a pie and a busybody's heart, I had walked instead into the far end of my own husband's greatest, most secret goodness. A kindness he'd done in the dark 40 years ago and never told a living soul. That had reached out across 4 decades and put its hand, at last, on mine. "Mrs. Whitcomb," the old man said without opening his eyes, "Della, I am going to die in this valley, soon. The men from the agency would take me back if they knew, to die on a cot with a number, and Silas has near broke himself keeping that from happening. I want you to know why he hides. It is not shame. It is love, worn down to the last thin place. He is the child from the wash. He is my daughter's son, and he is the last of us." He opened his eyes and found me. "I have a thing to ask of you," he said, "but not tonight. Tonight I am too full of a dead man's kindness to ask anyone for anything. Come back tomorrow, Della Whitcomb. Bring the trees fruit. And the two of you," a glance that took in Silas and me and the whole cracked-open room, "the two of you had best get used to the sight of each other. Because I am not done with either of you yet." I walked home across the frostbit grass in the dark with the empty pie dish under my arm, and the stars very hard and bright above the valley. And I did not write one word in my ledger that night, because there is no column in any book I have ever kept for what my husband did in that barn, or for what a plum pit is worth after 40 years, or for the debt I had just discovered I'd been living inside my whole marriage and never knew. I lay awake till dawn, but it wasn't the same quiet anymore. I went back the next day, and the day after, and after that I stopped counting the way you stop counting steps on a road you've decided to walk to the end. I brought food, not just the plum pie, though I brought that when the tree would give, but broth and soft things, and once, a custard my own mother used to make for sick folk, because a dying body forgets how to want food, and sometimes you can trick it back to wanting with sweetness and softness and the memory of being cared for. Nanton ate almost nothing, but he let me feed him, which I came to understand was itself a gift he was giving me, a proud man handing over the last of his self-sufficiency, a spoonful at a time, so that I would have something to do with my hands and my grief and my sudden, enormous, unlooked-for tenderness for a stranger who had turned out not to be a stranger at all. And Silas was the hardest ground I ever tried to grow anything in. He didn't trust me. Why would he? He'd spent his life being sorted by people like me, Mexican, maybe, half-breed more like, and he'd built a whole solitary existence out of the single principle that if you needed no one could betray you. And here I came, a valley woman with a pie and too many questions, walking straight into the one secret that could get the old man taken and Silas himself run out of the territory or worse. Every time I latched their gate behind me, I was one loose word at the feed store away from ending them both. He knew it. I knew it. For the first 2 weeks he watched me the way you'd watch a lit lamp near a hayloft. I earned it slow, the only way you earn anything real. I learned his hours. I learned that he sat up with the old man most of the night and did his ranch work in the raw dawn, and that he was running himself down to nothing. I could see it. The way his cheekbones had come forward and his hands had started to shake by evening, not from age but from the plain arithmetic of a man doing 2 people's living and one man's dying all alone. So I started coming at night. I'd sit with Nanton the dark middle hours, so Silas could sleep 4 hours instead of none. The first night I offered it he refused, of course. The second night he refused. The third night I simply walked into that house at 10 o'clock with a lamp and my knitting, and I said, "Go to bed, Silas Wren, before you fall down and I have 2 of you to nurse." And the old man laughed his wet laugh and said, She has your grandmother's voice, boy. There is no arguing with it. Go to bed." And Silas went. And that was the first crack. In the dark hours, the old man talked. He told me things I think he'd never told Silas, because you can say things to a stranger you can't say to the child you raised. You can let a stranger see the whole shape of your fear because you won't have to face them across the breakfast table afterward. He told me about the long moving that killed his mother and two of his sisters, the reservation with its bad water and its counting, and its long, slow murder by boredom of a people who had lived their whole lives in wind and space. He told me about his daughter, Silas's mother, who'd married a white cowboy named Wren for love and for shelter both, and who died of the coughing sickness when Silas was 9, and how the boy had come to him then, half of each world and welcome in neither, and how the two of them had drifted the borderlands for 20 years, working cattle, keeping low, an old Apache and his half-white grandson, until the old man's body finally started to quit, and Silas had done the maddest, tenderest thing. Spent every dollar they had to buy a broken-down ranch in a quiet valley so that his grandfather could die on land, with a horizon under a sky, and not on a cot behind a fence. He thinks I do not know what it cost him, Nanton told me one night, his voice a thread. The ranch. He thinks I believe we came into money. I let him think I believe it. It is the only lie I let him tell me because it is a lie made of love, and a man should be allowed to give his last gift without being thanked, or it stops being a gift and becomes a debt. He turned his head on the bolster and looked at me in the lamplight. You know about that. You keep a book of it. Silas told me. Your little book of who owes what. He's been talking about me, I said. He talks about you more than he knows he does. The old man's eyes glittered. You are a puzzle to him, Della Whitcomb, a woman who owes him nothing, who could destroy him with a word, and who instead brings custard in the dark and sits with a dying Apache so a half-breed cowboy can sleep. He does not have a column in his own book for you. It frightens him. Good. He has been unfrightened and alone too long. A man alone gets so he thinks solitude is the same thing as safety. It is not. It is only quiet or dying. I didn't have an answer for that. I had lived 3 winters proving him right. The thing the old man had said he'd ask of me, he asked it in the 4th week. On a night the wind came down off the mountains hard enough to worry the shutters. When I die, he said, plain as weather, Silas will want to take me away to bury, high up. In the rocks the old way, where no one will find me, and dig me up for a museum in the East. That has happened, Della. They dig us up. They put my grandfather's people in glass cases. Silas knows this, and he will want to carry me 3 days into the mountains to hide me proper. And it will kill him. He is already worn to the string. A 3-day ride in winter, packing a body and grief and fear all at once. He will do it because he loves me, and because it is the old right way, and it will break something in him that will not mend. He gripped my wrist. His hand was all bone, but the grip was strong. The last strength in him gathered up for this. I want to be buried here, he said, on this land, in your husband's valley. In the ground of the one white man who ever put down his rifle and said I got a fire. I want to lie near that tree, and I need you to make Silas allow it. He will not hear it from me. He will think I am giving up my people's way to spare him, and he will refuse out of love. He must hear it from you. You must make him see that his grandfather does not want to be a burden carried up a mountain. That his grandfather wants to rest in the one place on this earth where a stranger was once kind for no reason. Will you do that, Della? It is a heavy thing to ask. I know it is. It was the heaviest thing anyone had asked of me since Amos took my hand at the very end and made me promise not to sell the ranch to his brother. I sat with it. The wind pulled at the house. Because it wasn't simple. To bury an Apache man on my land, in that territory in that year, if it were ever known, it would mark me. The valley that had already decided Silas Wren was a half-breed with something to hide would decide the Whitcomb widow had gone strange, had taken up with Indians, had let one be planted in Christian ground beside her own husband's grave. I would lose the little standing 3 winters of widowhood had left me. The Kesslers would stop sending their boy to help with my roundup. The women would stop saving me a pew. I knew exactly what it would cost, down to the last coin, because I am a woman who keeps a book of exactly what things cost. And I heard my husband's voice, 40 years off in a snowy barn. I got a fire. Yes, I said, I'll do it. And Nanton, he won't have to lie in Christian ground apart from mine. There's room by Amos. He'd have wanted it. I know he would. The man who carried your pit 40 years, he'd want you close enough to reach. The old man let go of my wrist. He put his hand over his eyes. And the proud, dry, unbreakable old man cried, finally, all the way, while the wind hunted around the little house and I held his other hand and did not say a word, because some griefs you do not fill with words, you only witness, the way I had learned to witness my own. Telling Silas was worse than I feared. I told him at dawn in the barn while he forked hay to the horses, because I'd learned by then that Silas could hear hard things better with a task in his hands. I told him what his grandfather wanted. I watched it land. He set down the fork. He stood very still with his back to me for a long moment, and then he turned around and there was a fury in his face I hadn't seen before, a young man's fury, hot and cornered. No, he said. You don't get to come in here with your pies and your knitting and decide where my grandfather, you've known him a month. I've had him my whole life. I know what he needs. He needs the mountains, the old way, not to be planted in a white graveyard next to your husband like he's yours to keep. It hurt, it was meant to hurt. And under the fury I could see the truth of it, that I had come in a month ago, that I was deciding a thing that was his to decide, that he was terrified and exhausted and about to lose the only person on earth who was his. And here was a valley woman standing in his barn telling him how to bury his own dead. You're right, I said. It isn't mine to keep, it's his to give. And he's giving it, Silas, to you, so you don't have to break yourself carrying him up a mountain. He knows what that ride would do to you. He's watched you go down to nothing keeping him alive, and the last thing he wants, the very last thing, is for his death to finish the job. He wants to spare you, and he can't say it to you himself because you'd refuse him out of love. So he asked me to say it. Because I'm nothing to you. Because you can be angry at me and it won't cost either of us anything. That's why it's me standing in your barn and not him in your bedroom. He chose the stranger, Silas, on purpose, so the person he loves wouldn't have to carry this too. Silas Wren stood in the gray barn light and I watched the fury go out of him the way a fire goes out, not all at once, but sinking, collapsing inward, until there was nothing left but a young man with nobody, about to have even less. He put his hand over his mouth. His shoulders came down. He's really going, he said. Not a question. A thing he'd been holding off from saying out loud for months because saying it out loud made it real. Yes, I said, he's really going, and soon. And he wants to go here, near a man who was kind to him once for no reason, in a valley with a horizon, close enough to the tree to hear the wind in it. That's not giving up his people's way, Silas. That's the most his people's way thing I ever heard. Choosing the ground, choosing who you rest beside, choosing to make even your dying a gift to the ones you love. He cried then. And this time he let me put my arms around him. The first time I'd touched him, this closed-up, run-down, achingly young man, and he cried into my shoulder in the barn at dawn the way Amos had never let himself cry even at the end. And I held the last of Nanton's people while the horses ate and the light came up gray over the valley. And I understood that the old man had done it again, had turned even the negotiation of his own burial into a thing that would leave the living less alone. All right, Silas said finally, wrecked into my shoulder. All right here, but I dig it, and I do the words my way both ways, his and whatever, both. Both, I agreed. That's right, both. Nanton lived 11 more days. They were, I think, the best 11 days of that whole strange season, and I have wondered since whether the old man arranged that too. Whether, Once the fear of the mountain ride and the agency men and the glass museum cases had been set down, he simply gave himself permission to enjoy the end of his life. He talked. He teased Silas. He made me tell him about Amos, all of it, the 40 years of the same man burning his mouth on the same pie, and he laughed at the parts a widow doesn't usually get to laugh at. And it did something for me that 3 winters of careful mourning never had. It let Amos be a whole person again in my mouth, funny and stubborn and alive, instead of a wound I tended. One afternoon, near the end, when he was too weak to sit up, he had me bring him to the window. Silas carried him, he weighed nothing by then, nothing at all, and propped him where he could see out across the fence line to my place, to the pump, to the ragged plum tree standing bare against the winter sky. "There it is," the old man said. His voice was almost gone. "My mother's tree, it grew after all." He looked at it a long time. "Della, when I am under it, in the spring when it flowers, you will tell me. Say it out loud at the tree, I will hear it. My people believe the dead stay near the things they loved." A ghost of the old dry smile. "And I have decided to believe my people again. It is a better way to die than the other. I'll tell you," I promised. "Every spring, I'll stand at the tree and I'll tell you it flowered." "Good," he said. And he closed his eyes, and Silas carried him back to the bed. And outside the wind moved in the bare branches of a tree that a dying man had given a stranger's husband 40 years before, in the dark, in the snow, with the last valuable thing he owned. He died in the last dark hour before dawn, on a morning so still the smoke went straight up. I was there. I'd taken the night watch, and near 4 o'clock his breathing changed, went long and slow, with those wide silences between that anyone who has sat a deathbed knows and dreads, and I woke Silas, and the 2 of us sat on either side of the narrow bed and held a hand each while the old man made the crossing. He didn't wake. But near the very end his lips moved, and Silas leaned close, and afterward told me it was words in the old tongue, his grandfather saying the names of his mother and his sisters and his daughter, the whole line of the dead he was going to join, calling them the way you'd call to people waiting for you at the far side of a river. And then one long breath out and no breath in. The stillness that came into the room then was not the stillness of my 3 winters. I want to be clear about that because it matters. My widowhood stillness was an absence, a subtraction, 1 cup where there'd been 2. This was different. This was fullness. A life had been completed, all the way on its own terms, in the place it chose, beside the people it had gathered, and completion has a weight to it, a rightness that plain loss does not. We sat in it a long time. Neither of us moved to light more lamps or do the necessary things. We just sat, the widow and the half-breed cowboy, holding the hands of a dead old man who had, in one short season, made us each less alone than we'd been in years. "He waited," Silas said finally. His voice was raw but steady. "You know that. He was ready months ago. His body was ready. He waited for it." He looked up at me across the bed. "He waited for you to bring that pie. I think he did. I think he was hanging on for something and he didn't know what, and then you walked in with plums off Amos's tree and he got to finish the story. He got the end of it. Then he could go." I have thought about that a great deal since. Whether an old man can hold death off by will until a plum pit finishes its 40-year journey home. I don't know. I keep a ledger. I like things that add up. That one doesn't add up. And I've made a kind of peace with it not adding up. Which is, I think, the truest thing this whole season taught me, that the accounts that matter most are the ones you can't ever balance, the kindnesses given in the dark that come back 40 years late in a shape you'd never have predicted, the debts that turn out to be gifts and the gifts that turn out to be debts, all of it moving in a current too deep and too slow for any book to hold. We buried him 3 days later, on my land by Amos, under the plum tree. Silas dug the grave himself all one day, would not let me help, and I understood by then not to offer twice. He did the old way first, things I didn't watch because they weren't mine to watch, an hour alone with his grandfather at dawn, and the sound of his voice rising and falling in the old tongue, carrying across the frost the way that first night's singing had carried and pulled me out of my bed. Then when he called me, we did the other way, the valley way, the only way I knew. I read the 23rd Psalm out of Amos's Bible, my breath smoking in the cold, and Silas stood across the open grave with his hat in his hands and his black hair loose and his face wide open, and unashamed for the first time since I'd known him, and I don't believe either the old way or the psalm minded sharing that morning. I think they got on fine. I think the old man would have laughed at the both of us, standing there so solemn, and told us to cut the pie. Nobody came from town. I told no one, and Silas had no one to tell, and so it was just the two of us and the yellow dog, who lay down at the head of the grave when the digging was done and would not be moved, and stayed there 3 days, and howled the first 2 nights the way it had howled the nights that started all of this, and then, the 3rd night, went quiet. I like to think it had finished saying whatever it needed to say. I like to think we all had. It cost me the way I'd known it would, not all at once but slow, the way real costs come. The Kessler boy didn't come for the spring roundup, and when I asked, his mother wouldn't quite meet my eye, and there's always talk about the Whitcomb widow and the half-breed and the Indian she'd let be buried on Christian land. Mrs. Pryor, who'd sat with me the day of Amos's funeral, stopped saving me a pew. I wrote it all in my ledger, every subtraction out of long habit, and then one night I read back over that column, all those small withdrawn kindnesses, and I closed the book and I did not open it to that page again, because it had stopped being a true accounting. It only listed what I'd lost. It had no column for the old man's laugh, or for the sound of the old tongue at dawn, or for the way Silas Wren had started, that spring, to lift his hand off the reins in a half-wave when he passed me on the road, a small thing, a nothing, from a man who'd once ridden a 1/4 mile out of his way to avoid being seen. There's no column in any book for that. I've looked. Silas stayed. I thought he might not. I thought, once the old man was in the ground and the thing that had pinned Silas to that valley was gone, he might drift on the way he'd drifted his whole life, half of each world and welcome in neither, and I braced myself to lose him the way I'd braced myself for every other loss of my 3 lean winters. I even had it half written in the book, the cowboy next door will go and the quiet will come back. But he stayed. The ranch was his now, bought with the last of everything for a dying man's sake, and I suppose a man who spent his all on a piece of ground doesn't lightly walk away from it. But that wasn't the whole of it, and we both knew it wasn't. The whole of it was that we'd become, over that strange season, the nearest thing either of us had to family, the widow and the grandson, bound by a plum pit and a barn and a kindness done in the snow before either of us was who we were. He fixed my fences now, in daylight, not caring who saw. I baked for him plum pie in the fruiting years, other things in the lean ones, and he'd eat it at my table with his hat off. And sometimes, not often, he'd tell me a piece of his grandfather I hadn't heard, and I'd tell him a piece of Amos. And between us we kept 2 dead men alive in that kitchen the way you keep a fire, feeding it, not letting it go out. I won't tell you it turned into more than that, the way a story might want it to. He was young enough to be my son, and grief is not romance, and I was too old and too honest to build a false thing on the true one we already had. But I'll tell you this. The house next door had a light in it now at night, across the dark between our 2 places, and on the nights when my old widow quiet came creeping back in, and it does still come, it never fully leaves, I could look out my window and see that light, and know there was a person in it who was mine, in the way that matters, and who I was too, and it was enough. More than enough. It was more than I'd had any right to expect from a life that had already given me a good man, and 40 years, and 1 straggling tree. The spring after, the plum tree flowered. It flowered like it never had in all the 40 years I'd watched it, white all over, top to bottom, so thick with bloom the bare gray branches disappeared, and the whole thing stood in my yard like something that had forgotten it was old, humming with bees, dropping petals on the 2 graves beneath it. Amos's weathered now, and beside it the new turned one, still raw, with the plain stone Silas had cut himself. No name on it because a name would have been a danger, and also because the old man hadn't wanted one. Just a shape scratched deep. A thing from the old tongue that Silas wouldn't translate for me, and I didn't ask. I went out to it in the morning in the cold, before Silas was up. I stood under the tree in its white cloud of bloom, with the petals coming down slow around me and the bees loud and the 2 graves at my feet, and I felt like a fool, and I did it anyway because I'd promised. It flowered, I said out loud to the raw new grave. Nanton, you hear me, your mother's tree, it flowered, I never saw it like this. 40 years and it's like it waited too, it's like it was waiting for you to get here. My voice went, I let it go. You're home, all the way home. I told you I'd tell you and I'm telling you. It flowered. The wind moved in the branches, the petals came down. And I stood there a long time, an old widow talking to the dead under a blooming tree, and I did not feel foolish anymore, and I did not feel alone, and I did not, for once, reach for any book to write down what it was worth, because some things you carry in your hand across a frozen field not knowing what you're carrying, and some things come back to you 40 years late in a shape you'd never have guessed, and some accounts don't balance and were never meant to. And the only true thing you can do is stand under the tree in the falling white, and say it out loud so the dead can hear. It flowered. I heard Silas's door open across the way. I heard his boots on the porch. I didn't turn around yet. I let the petals come down a moment more.